Halo, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
How are you today, Septi?
I'm fine. How about you, Dini?
Okay. Okay, today we would like to discuss about the book. The title of the book is Linguist Assessment Principles and Classroom Practice. And we would like to discuss and review the chapter is chapter 11, Grading and Student Evaluation. Okay, Septi, can you tell me what is have you learned from this chapter?
This chapter addresses topics such as what short grade reflect, who sort different objective, tasks, and component of a course features into a formula for concluding grades, how the cultural and institutional philosophies the state standard for grading, how can a teacher achieve viability is grading student, and what is grading rubric? Um, Guidelines for selecting grading criteria. The first, consistency. It's essential for a component of grading to be consistent with a institutional philosophy and regulation. For a further discussion of this topic, some institution, for example, mandate deduction for unique absence. Others require that only the final exam determine a course grade. Still other institutions, many implicitly the dictate a relatively high number of us and BS for each class of students embedded in institutional philosophies are the implied expectation that students place a school or program and your attention to those impressions in warrant. The second, transparency. All of the components of a final grade need to be explicitly stated in writing to students at the beginning of a term of study with a designation of per percentage or weighting figure for each component. The third, specificity. Specific. If your grading system, the third, specific. If your grading system include item D, third G, in the questionnaire in the previous section, improvement, behavior, effort, motivation. It is important for you to recognize their subjective, but this does not give you as excuse to avoid converting such factor in observable and measurable result. Challenge yourself to create checklists, chart, and not taking system that allow you to cover it to the student the basis for your conclusion. It is further advisable to guard against final week impre- impressionistic summary of decision by giving ongoing periodic feedback to student on subject matter through written comment or conferences. Finally, consider allocation relatively small weight to item C, chart 8, so that a grade primarily reflect achievement. Um, designation of 5% to 10% of a grade to such factor will not mark stroke achievement in a course. On the other and a small percentage locate course grade. For example, suppose you have a well-behaved, seemingly motivated and effort-giving student whose quantifiable score but his or her at the top of the range or B grade.
Okay, thank you. I think your what do you have learned from this chapter is really good, and this is really important for us as a teacher in the future. And then my I have what is I have learned from this chapter is for the first, um, in this part, prevailing attitude towards a relative system is well accepted and controversial. Example, there are two groups workshop with English teacher at the alley at San Francisco State University. Here was the why here way the task was assigned. Okay, in this workshop, participants were not surprised to see the distribution of the grade bands, but were astonished to discover the poor performers actually conform to a normal bell curve. Their conceptions of a disappointing group of students certainly did not look the bad on a graph, but they raised a brow turned further surprise when the next graph was displayed a distribution at the 420 grades assigned in the previous term to students in all the course of the LI, and the conclusion were drawn from this insight. First is teacher may hypothetically subscribe to a pre-selected set of expectations, but in the practice may not conform to those expectations. And then the second one is teacher all agreed they were quality of great evaluation at the alley. Their good nature and empathy for student predisposed them toward assigning grades that were higher than Ali standard and expectation. Okay, the next is institutional expectation and contrasts. Consideration of philosophies of grading and procedure for calculating grades is not complete without a focus on the role of the institution in determining grades. And transcript evaluator at college and universities are faced with variation across institutions on what they deem to be the threshold level for entry from a high school or another university. And being cognizant of institutional philosophy of grading is an important step toward a consistent and fair evaluation of your students. And the result could be avoidance of the class and even measures on the per student. Conversely, an easy teacher may become a favorite or popular not because of what the student learn, but because students know they will get a good grade. And the next is cultural norms and question of difficulty. A number of variables bear on issue in some culture. There are some culture. The first is it is unheard to ask a student to self-assess performance, and the second one is the teacher assign a grade and no one question the teacher criteria. The third is the measure of a good teacher is one who can design the test that is so difficult that no student can achieve a perfect score. The fourth is a corollary. Grades of A are reserved for a highly select few, and students are delighted with BS. And it is usually a combination of a number of possible factors. The first is experience as a teacher. The second one is adaptance of designing feasible tasks, and the third is taking special care to frame items, and then the fourth is mirroring in the class tasks the student have mastered. And after mastering a number of above contribution to a test that confirm a predicted difficulty level, it is your task to determine within your context an expected distribution of score or grades on to the fit the test toward that explanation. And the next is, what do ladder grades mean? They typically list the following description of ladder grades is A as excellent, and B as good, and C as adequate, and D as inadequate or unsatisfactory, and F as failing or unacceptable. Okay, the first, every teacher who use ladder grades for or a percentage score to provide an evaluation, whether a summative and of course assessment or a formal assessment procedure, should use a carefully constructed system of grading, assign grades on the basis of explicitly stated criteria, and the next is base the criteria and objectives of a course or assessment procedure, and the second levels or bands in which to place a learner response. For the guidelines for rubric development, an online search using the term developing rubric or creating rubric returns a host of websites and can assist you to further understand the usefulness of rubrics and how to design them. It's easy to see the benefit of rubrics in assessment model that oral and written response that may be both likely as a portfolio and journal and complex. Whether you use an answer or scoring key or rubric to measure a test taker's ability, calculating grades involves adding up test and quiz results, factoring in the other performance measure. And then guidelines for grading and evaluation. You should now understand that grading is not necessarily based on a universally accepted scale, and the grading is not sometimes subjective and depend on context. Tests are often graded on a curve. Grades reflect a teacher philosophy or grading. Grades reflect an institutional philosophy of grading. And with this characteristic of grading and evaluation in mind, the following principle guideline should help you be an effective grader and evaluator of student performance. And in this discussion of grading and evaluation bring us full circle to these themes presented in the first chapter of this book. Their interconnection for assessment and teaching was first highlighted in completing grading and evaluation for your student, and that independency in underscore. And as you develop your own philosophy of grading, make a focused attempt to confirm that philosophy to your approach to teaching. In communicative linguist classroom, that approach usually implies meaningful learning, authenticity, building to student autonomy, student-teacher collaboration, a community of learners, and the perception that your role is that of a facilitator or coach rather than a director or dictator. Okay, I think that's all what I have learned from this chapter. Thank you for your attention, and I say wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.